We are very happy to once again, and we welcome you to this semester's very interesting seminar series. This afternoon, we are very privileged to be joined by a very renowned person. Dr. John Osae-Kwapong is a renowned speaker. He's a very interesting personality, and we are very excited to have him here with us. Dr. Osae-Kwapong holds a PhD in political science from the George Mason University. He has 29 years of experience in tertiary education and also a lot of experience in institutional effectiveness and quality assurance within tertiary education. And he's been teaching research methods in data analytics and comparative politics, public action, and political economy in various tertiary institutions. He's actually currently the Director of Institutional Effectiveness and Quality Assurance at the Ashesi University. He's actually a fellow of the Ghana Center for Democratic Development, that is CDD Ghana. And over there, he's a project director for the democracy project. You are very welcome to the CSPS bi-weekly seminar. We are very happy to have you. You have about 30 to do a presentation to the audience, after which we'll go into questions. So welcome, Dr. John Osae-Kwapong. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Antoinette, to you. Good afternoon to all of the participants. I just say thank you for the invitation to share some thoughts on a topic that is very dear and near to my heart, that looks at Ghana's democracy over the last 33 years. In fact, this is a slight expansion of my book that I published in 2023, where back then we had 30 years of democracy. And so that book was titled 5 Presidents, 8 Elections, 30 Years Later. So this is a continuation of that work. But I am happy to be here, and thank you for the opportunity. Okay, so what I plan to do this afternoon is begin to provide just a quick context for my presentation. Again, I know technically we've elected 6 presidents, but one of those presidents, is in a second presidency. So that's why it's 5 presidents. But technically, we've had 6 presidential elections since the transition to democracy. If you look at Ghana's post-independence political trajectory, here are a few things that I would want to highlight as part of the development that have occurred over that period of time. So we had 5 military coups over a 15-year period. So you can see that between 1966 and 1981, it was quite a politically unstable period for the country. We also had 2 short-lived attempts, 69 to 72, 79 to 81, at multi-party democracy. Again, this is why 33 years of uninterrupted multi-party democracy in Ghana is a unique period that requires our constant reflection and posing questions that helps us understand what is different about this time. We also had a long period of non-democratic rule before the transition, which was 1981 to 1992. Whilst that period was non-democratic, that period also came with it a semblance of political stability, because we had moved away from the 66 to 81 period of regular military interventions in our political space. We finally made the transition to multi-party democracy in 1992 with the inaugural election, and then had the first inauguration of the Fourth Republic president on January 7th, 1993. And so since 1993, we've successfully, even amidst certain challenges, we've successfully had 9 elections. During that period, 4 of those elections have been or have resulted in political party turnover. So again, it is a very unique time because it's the first time that we have used the ballot box as the peaceful way of transitioning from one government to another. So the key question for me is this: how do citizens of a country with a largely non-democratic past after independence view democracy after living with it for over 30 years uninterrupted? This is the approach. I attempt to answer this question along 3 main thematic lines. 1, positive development over this 33-year period of time. I also look at some of what I consider to be the threats to democratic consolidation. And then lastly, I would look at our overall satisfaction with democracy. I provide answers by drawing on data from the Afrobarometer survey. Ghana has participated in all 10 rounds of the survey, 1999, 2000, and as you can see, using different sample sizes. So again, if you look at the years in which we have participated in the Afrobarometer survey, you would notice that every administration, in terms of our 2 main political parties, NPP or NDC, there has been at least 1 Afrobarometer survey conducted during their time. So it also gives us a way of capturing the sentiment of Ghanaians across different political administrations over the last 33 years of our democracy. For those of you who are not very familiar with the Afrobarometer survey, just a few quick things about the survey. It's a public attitude survey. It has over 100 questions around democracy, governance, leadership, institutions, economic conditions, perceptions of corruption, and other related issues in the region. The maiden edition of the survey was in 1999. 12 countries participated in that maiden edition, including Ghana. Since then, there's been 10 rounds of the survey, with the most recent round being 2024-2025. Plans are currently underway to begin round 11, which Ghana would be participating. And so far, almost about 42 countries in the region have participated in the survey. The survey interviews, it uses a nationally representative sample. They are conducted face-to-face in the language of the respondent's choice. So there are no necessarily language barriers for the sample that is drawn to participate in this survey. So I would encourage all of you to, again, familiarize yourself with the Afrobarometer survey. So some positive developments. I also want to add that a survey that is about 100 questions having been administered over a 25 time period, that you can't summarize all of it in a 30-minute presentation. But what I have done is to select some of the key questions that helps illustrate what citizens are saying about Ghana's democracy trajectory over the last 33 years. So in terms of positive development, observation 1, in general, Ghanaians support democratic norms and values. So one of the things that makes democracies tick is the key dimensions or the key things about democracy and the extent to which citizens embrace them. So our dispositions towards some of the things one would typically associate with democracy are positive or negative. And in general, you would see that over time, we do have positive dispositions towards some of these key questions of democracy. Yes, we may have seen slight dips here and there, but generally, we believe that Parliament, being the representatives of the people, should be the ones who make the law. We believe in parliamentary accountability of the executive. So majority still say that Parliament should ensure the president explains to it on a regular basis how his government spends taxpayers' money. And we see that reflected in a practice like the regular delivery of the State of the Nation address and the regular presentation of budgets and economic policy statements to Parliament. We believe in judicial constraints of the president. So Ghanaians do support the fact that the president must always obey the laws and the courts, even if he thinks otherwise. We believe in term limits. So the Constitution should limit the president to serving a maximum of 2 terms in office. We strongly support the use of, and that's the line over here. We strongly support the use of elections as the method for choosing our leaders. The one positive development, although I capture it here, but I want to highlight is that there was a period in which Ghanaians' support for media rights without any government interference began to drop. Now, if you match this against questions around trust in the media, you would see that it was also occurring at a time where Ghanaian trust in both public and private media was declining. That is why you would see that between 2012 and by 2017, support for media rights had dropped. But then again, you see it has increased and currently stands at an appreciable level. So that for me overall is a positive development in terms of embrace of democratic norms and values. Ghanaians prefer democracy and reject non-democratic alternatives. So if you ask, democracy is preferable to any other form of government, over here you would see that we continue in the most recent survey, 73% of Ghanaians still prefer democracy to any other form of government. The reason you see a dip in 2002 is that in that survey, almost about 37% of Ghanaians answered the preference for democracy question with don't know. And whenever I work with AB data, I refer to that period as a period of democratic uncertainty. But since then, the percentage who answered this question with don't know has gone from 37% in the most recent round, it was down to just 1%. So whenever I say that Ghanaians have made their peace with democracy based on the question of preference, I highlight that to say, and we are very certain because we've gone from 30-something% saying don't know whether they prefer democracy or not to only 1% there. We reject one-party rule. We strongly reject one-man rule. This line that I'm highlighting, which shows a drop in the trajectory in our disapproval of military rule, that has seen a decline over time. But I still highlight it as a positive development because in the most recent round, it was still at 68% of Ghanaians rejecting military rule. Should it slide any further, then it would raise concerns and worrying. But if you juxtapose our support for democracy and our rejection of non-democratic alternatives, then we can all agree that we still generally have a strong preference for democracy. We also recognize the legitimacy of the state. Because we've had a history of military interventions, we've had a lot of military rule, we had a 11-year period of non-democratic rule, it can raise the question about whether Ghanaians recognize the legitimacy of the state, or that because we lived in non-democratic eras, you had no choice but to accept and recognize that legitimacy of the state. But what we see from these questions that were asked only a few times in Afrobarometer, I think 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So we asked it at 6 different times, the most recent being 2017. But you do see that in general, Ghanaians support the idea that police have the right to make people obey the law. We should obey the government in power, whether we voted for it or not. The courts have the right to make decisions, and people must abide by it. Tax authorities may always have the right to make people pay their taxes. So again, these are questions that, when put together, for me, signals the fact that Ghanaians accept and recognize the legitimacy of the state and the role that the state has to play in law enforcement, binding judicial decisions, or even ensuring that we pay our taxes. But even as we've seen positive developments in our democracy trajectory, and one of the things that you would constantly hear our political leaders references that we've had all of these years of democracy, we've had peaceful, generally peaceful elections, we've even had political turnover where the loser in the election has given their consent. There are still some threats to democratic consolidation. In the political science literature, the argument was always that once you transition to democracy and you're able to have another election, then you are on the path of consolidation, or even if you've not already consolidated that democracy. But I think over time, we are realizing that democratic consolidation is not a one-time event. It's something that you have to keep working on it. And as we would see over time, even as we express positive norms and attitudes about key things, democracy, there are some threats to democratic consolidation in Ghana. The first one that I would highlight is our low levels of trust in key institutions. So whether it's the police, the presidency, the courts, local government, parliament, traditional rulers, over time, we continue to see a declining level of trust in the institutions that are designed to make our democracy work. I don't have it on this slide, but the other dimension that makes the trust issue more worrying is that when you disaggregate the data by party affiliation, you would notice that the level of trust Ghanaians have in institutions tend to improve slightly when the party they say they prefer is in power. Then that level of trust starts to dip when the party they prefer is in opposition. So that's the other dimension of the trust issue that we have to keep in mind when we are thinking about ways in which we have to address some of these threats to democratic consolidation. In addition to low levels of trust, we are beginning to perceive our democratic institutions as corrupt. So the Afrobarometer question asks, how many of the people associated with each of these institutions do you think are corrupt? And it's none, some, most, all of them. This combines most and all of them. And you will see that over time, we are perceiving a lot of individuals associated with our key institutions as being corrupt. The other threat to democracy that I want to point out here is what I see as a perception of a lack of equal treatment before the law. One of the things that democracies pride themselves in is the rule of law. The law is no respecter of persons. Big man, big woman, small woman, regardless of your socioeconomic standing in society, once you run afoul of the law will deal with you. But what we are seeing over time, expressed in the Afrobarometer survey, is this widening perception gap where Ghanaians feel like ordinary people who break the law are more likely to be punished at levels much higher than quote-unquote officials who commit crimes. So again, you see that huge gap in terms of equal treatment before the law. We are also experiencing what I call a democracy deficit. So the democracy deficit looks at the difference between the percentage of Ghanaians who support democracy and the percentage of Ghanaians who say they are satisfied with the way democracy is working. So if you look at 1999, the level of support depicted by the blue line was very high. The level of satisfaction depicted by the brownish, orangish looking line was low. So you saw that huge gap. But over time, you would notice that the trajectory was positive, where satisfaction was mirroring support. In fact, in 2008, for the first time, about 3% more Ghanaians felt satisfied with the way democracy was working than even they were asking for in terms of support. We saw that trajectory starting to decline again with the gap opening up. We saw the gap close, and then we see the gap back to the 1999 levels in terms of how badly we want democracy, which is support for democracy, and how well we think it is working, which is our satisfaction with the way democracy is working. So now the last theme I want to look at is our overall satisfaction with democracy. And there are 4 key observations I want to make in terms of our overall satisfaction with democracy. First, I look at certain basic democratic freedoms, which always comes, with any democracy. Freedom of speech, freedom of voting, freedom of association. So again, here, whilst the percentages, in my opinion, still remain at an appreciably good level, we also do see some declines in that trajectory. But overall, the satisfaction is at least 65% of Ghanaians over time feeling that they are completely free to say what they think, who to vote for, and whether to join any political organization or not. Our evaluation of elections and the electoral environment is mixed. So if you look at these 2 blue lines, generally, we believe that we are completely free to choose who to vote for without feeling pressured. And the reason I also highlight elections is that it's one of the key things that holds our democracy architecture together. So over time, we do see a decline in trust for the Electoral Commission, depending on which election preceded the Afrobarometer survey. How we believe an election was completely free and fair has sort of oscillated over time. So sometimes we may rate an election as completely free and fair. So for example, if you look at Afrobarometer 2017, which rated the 2016 election, you do see that a high percentage of Ghanaians rated that election as completely free and fair. But if you look at Afrobarometer 2014, where the reference election was 2012, and as you recall, that election ended up in an almost 8-month dispute before the Supreme Court. You can see why, in retrospect, Ghanaians looking at everything that emerged during all of those court hearings would view that election as not a completely free and fair election. Do we fear becoming victims of political intimidation or violence during elections? No. Very few Ghanaians, less than 10%, have that fear in any given election year. Democracy also, for me, has to deliver more than just the basic democratic freedoms. I also believe that democracy has to deliver to citizens social and economic dividends. Again, over time, and Afrobarometer does ask about 10 different policy areas. I selected some 6 key ones for the purpose of this presentation. And again, you see that Ghanaian evaluation regarding how well our governments have delivered these democracy dividends have changed over time. Sometimes it's up, sometimes it's down on some of these key things. Let me show you a different visual of that. So if you average it over time, you would notice that job creation is where we've, citizens haven't given it its best. evaluation. In fact, the highest evaluation of job creation was during the coup era in 2008. Education remains one of the best evaluated, and that is also because of Afrobarometer round 7 in 2017 and 2019, and partly because of the introduction of the free SHS program, right? That it actually shaped Ghanaian perceptions of how well they felt our government was trying to address education needs. The economy, only 47% on average, if you look at all 10 rounds of the survey. Water and sanitation, 50%, health, 59%. Our ratings of health were much better during the coup era, particularly 2005 and 2008, and then 2017. And so you can see how some of those areas would end up pulling up the average. Ghanaians acknowledge that the country's democracy faces challenges. So the question here in Afrobarometer survey is extent of democracy, and the options are not a democracy, democracy with major problems, democracy with minor problems, a full democracy, don't know. You would notice that typically the predominant response has fallen within the category of democracy with minor problems. For the first time, though, in 2008, almost 6 out of 10 Ghanaians perceived the country to be a full democracy. The other thing that I would highlight here is that in the column democracy with major problems, you would notice that over time, we've also seen an increase in the percentage of Ghanaians noting that we are a democracy that has some quote-unquote major problems. This is our overall satisfaction with the way democracy is working, which has shown a decline. The thing I want to draw attention here is that in a lot of public conversations, there was a period in which people started questioning, do we even want this democracy? Ghanaians are unhappy with democracy. And what I would always caution is that based on the empirical data from Afrobarometer survey, the dissatisfaction being expressed is not with democracy as a system of government. It is dissatisfaction with the way the system is working. And that's how Afrobarometer phrases the question. How satisfied are you with the way democracy works in this country? And that for me is what gives me consolation whenever I look at the high percentage that support democracy. In fact, if you look at dissatisfaction with democracy and you disaggregate it by support for democracy, even those who express being dissatisfied with democracy still say that democracy is preferable to any other form of government. So whenever you hear me in any public conversation saying that Ghanaians have made their peace with democracy, I am not saying that because Ghanaians don't express any pinch points about democracy, they do. But it's the fact that when you probe the data, we reject non-democratic alternatives. Even when we are dissatisfied with the way it is working, we still say democracy is preferable. So we have embraced it. It is making sure that the other things that come with a democratic system of government would deliver and deliver in a way that is consistent. So my concluding thoughts, on the balance of things, we remain supportive of democracy, even though satisfaction has declined. There are major challenges that must be dealt with, especially at a time when we are surrounded by neighbors who have experienced complete democratic breakdown. The stories of Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger, Guinea, the failed attempt in Benin. Others who continue to manipulate institutions and constitutions to entrench power. We've seen the changes in Togo. We've seen the changes. We saw some of the changes with term limits in a place like Cote d'Ivoire. 3 key areas must consume our energies: reforming our institutions to address especially the trust issue, continuing to address the socio-economic needs of Ghanaians, in a way that is consistent so that we don't see these upswings and downswings in how well Ghanaians think our governments are delivering the socioeconomic dividends of democracy. And I also believe that we have to improve the electoral environment, particularly when it comes to our trust in the Electoral Commission. Thank you very much, and I will turn it back to you, Dr. Antoinette, for thoughts, reflections, and questions from participants.
Thank you very much, Dr. Osae-Kwapong. That was a very, very interesting presentation, and we are very, very excited. In fact, I have also put some questions here. But first, I'd like to give the opportunity to our very valuable audience and all who have joined us for this afternoon's Center for Social Policy bi-weekly seminar presentations. I'd like to first of all go ahead and read the questions in the chat, and I'd invite all other participants to raise their hands, and then I will call you. So you can use the raise hand function, which you see at the very bottom of your screen or your phone, whichever you are using, and then I would call you and allow you to put your question out. In the chat, I'll read the first question. So, Doc, the first question to you is, can you throw more light on why Ghanaians' rejection of military rule seems to have dropped by about 15% since 1999? Is this a repudiation of democracy, an anxious flirtation with military rule, or a combination of the two, or something else? So that's a question for you, Doc.
Very good question. I don't believe it's a repudiation of democracy itself, but I believe it is a reaction to, if this democracy thing is not working the way we really want it to work, what alternative would we, God forbid, even briefly consider, right? And so it is in those moments of dissatisfaction and thinking about the fact that this is a country that has had a history with military rule that you start seeing some of that quote unquote softening in our disposition. What I want to add quickly though is that in Afrobarometer round 9, we did ask a question about military intervention and what should happen, God forbid, if there's a military intervention. And on that score, Ghanaians do say that even if there was, we should quickly or over time return to civilian rule. So we haven't repudiated democracy yet, but we also do have a history with military rule. And sometimes, at least in public comments that I see in social media whenever we have these conversations, it is this sort of feeling that, well, we know military governments, we know what they did or didn't do. The promise of democracy is not realizing. So what's the big deal about democracy? And I think that is the tension that we continue to wrestle with, even as we continue to say democracy is preferable.
Thank you very much, Doc. I think in line with that, I was going to ask a question. So if I may add on something with that, I wanted to find out from you if the data showed that this 15% drop had anything to do with age, because we seem to believe that the younger generation who haven't experienced anything got to do with military rule may start to think that military rule could be something that would be an option. So did the data show anything about this that gives us some kind of generational or some interpretation as to the generational, preference or not? We wouldn't say preference, but generational opinions about military rule vis-a-vis democracy.
Thank you for that question. And I did address that question in an opinion piece I wrote for the Daily Graphic. Our youth are still pro-democratic, and the declines that we have seen in the percentage of Ghanaians who disapprove of military rule is no more significant among the youth than it is for other demographic groups. So when you disaggregate it by age, you will definitely see that Young people still say democracy is preferable to any other form of government, but they have also experienced that same decline like other demographic age groups, but not any significantly different, where we can say it is an age thing where a younger generation that hasn't experienced a military coup is more likely to embrace it than not. The data does not bear out that narrative.
Okay, okay. Thank you very much, Doc. There's a second question in the chat, and I'll quickly give that one to you before we go then to see the hands that have been raised. So the question is, so please, can we say that the issues of trust in institutions is not objective because it changes given who is in power?
I believe the issue
Doc,
of trust is objective. The point I made or I tried to make with the political coloration of trust is the fact that when you throw in the partisan dimension, it further worsens the trust issue. So even if there were no partisan views of our institutions when it comes to trust, I will still be concerned that we see a declining level of trust in key institutions, something that we did not necessarily see by Afrobarometer round 4 in 2008. So the worry I'm pointing out is that not only is that trust going down, but when we throw in our partisan lenses, it even makes it more worrying, because you don't want a situation where when a citizen is going to, let's say, the court, they shouldn't care whether their party is in power or not, right? That institutions should be viewed as the place where I can go to have my grievances addressed, regardless of whether the party I prefer is in power or
not. Okay. Thank you very much. I will now go to the participants list and invite participants to ask questions. If you'd raise your hand, I would unmute you and you can ask your question. I don't see any hand up. Has anyone raised their hand, or would anyone like to ask a question? Okay. Professor Abdul Gafaru, Prof is the director for our center. Prof, thank you very much for joining us. You may go ahead and ask your question. Prof, please unmute. I've permitted you to talk now. Hello, Prof, we can't hear you. Yes, we can hear you now. Please go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes, Prof, we can hear you now.
Okay. I was saying thanks to our distinguished presenter. My question: find out whether he has considered or is considering going beyond Afrobarometer data in undertaking this kind of work. Afrobarometer is definitely great. I use it a lot. I use it for different kinds of things, and because it also contains large number of respondents, I mean, it has some level of legitimacy, much better than probably small surveys that individual would have gone to conduct or carry out themselves. But the limitation or the challenge is that in many cases, as researchers, we go out to address questions that were not explicitly asked within the survey. So, for example, when I take the portion about the presentation regarding threats to democratic consolidation, I am pretty convinced that if one goes out to conduct qualitative interviews with key informants, and again, let's remember that Afrobarometer surveys don't target key informants. I mean, it surveys a range of Ghanaians to ask all kinds of questions. Whereas if I were to go out methodologically to target people with specific expertise and ask them specific questions bordering on my research, the kind of answers that I may get could in one way or the other be different or be much deeper in terms of the value or quality of that kind of information. And one typical example is if you ask experts in terms of what they consider to be among the leading threats to democratic consolidation in Ghana, you will probably hear some factors that are not captured within the Afrobarometer survey. I mean, the growing or the increased monetization of politics and the use of illicit rents in party financing. We are struggling to address problems like galamsey, partly because of the close relationships between party financing and the galamsey phenomenon. But I'm not so sure, whether these kind of insights would necessarily be captured in great detail by Afrobarometer surveys. And so I'm just wondering whether there is the possibility or consideration of complementing this kind of data with insights from experts, insights from key informants. I'm sure that would undoubtedly make the presentation or the paper much richer one. It will definitely have some kind of value addition. That's the basic point I wanted to make. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof. We'll go ahead and also ask Douglas Corti. And then after the two questions, Dr. Osae-Kwapong can respond. Douglas, please unmute and then you can.
Okay, thank you very much, Doc, and privileged to be part of this discussion. Well, I'm listening to the presentation. I was glad you talked about the issue of trust in democratic institutions, which is of concern to governance experts. Unfortunately, Prof. Gafaru touched on the part around galamsey, which I'd wanted to look at. In terms of the trust in the institutions, I wanted to find out the linkage with issues, that's the governance issues pertaining at the time, and how that affects the trust in democratic institutions. And I think recently the issue of vote buying that had come up was one that was of concern, and people were wondering what kind of institutions have mandates to kind of regulate that. But I know there is work, CDD and others are working on it. So I would want to now look at another angle of the Afrobarometer and ask the question whether maybe in future we would have a trace of methodology. I don't know whether it's methodology or in questioning, to know whether people, the voting history of people, could also be captured, in the sense that you had mentioned that people have trust in the institutions when their government is in power. It will be good to know people who vote on based on strength, those the what we call the floating voters, to use them as a neutral gauge of what it is about the trust in democratic institutions. Because if people tend to vote in one particular line and then you constantly ask them the same question, we are likely to see that. So that, for me, it's my thinking that if we could have that window to see, okay, we have this margin of maybe 10 to 15% who in the last 3-4 elections have switched their voting pattern, and this is what they think about it, and using that as a neutral gauge would help. So that would be my comment or suggestion. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I think that's more of a comment and some feedback. Doc, so do you want to respond to Dr. Gafaru's comment question then? Before we go ahead, there's two more participants who have raised their hands, and I think after they finish, we would call it a close to the presentation and to this afternoon's seminar program. So. Sure. Doc, a quick response to that, and then we'll call the two participants for their questions. Thank you.
Okay. So with regards, in response to Prof. Abdul's comments and feedback, So for the purpose of this presentation, I did focus solely on the Afrobarometer data. But there was work I did last year on landscape of democracy in Ghana, where I pulled in data from the Mo Ibrahim Index of African Governance. I also looked at the Corruption Perception Index. I looked at the Democracy Index. I looked at data from other sources as well. And so again, when you, on the issue of trust, for example, between the Mo Ibrahim Index, the Democracy Index, the Civicus Monitor, you'll see that it reinforces some of the perceptions of the low trust that is expressed in Afrobarometer. But yes, he's very right that triangulating it with other data sources helps even make the argument stronger when you start talking about democracy and some of the threats that we face. Also, as part of a project, I did hold a number of what we call democracy dialogues. So one in Tamale, one in Cape Coast, and one with the youth foundation, with the youth program with the coup Foundation. So again, some of the things that highlights did actually emerge in those focus group discussions. In terms of Douglas, the linkage with governance issues and time. So what Afrobarometer will do is when it is reporting the data, it makes note of key developments as of when the data is being collected. So sometimes some of those topical issues when the data was being collected does do that. We do not ask questions about how a voter or a respondent voted, except for 2017, where we asked the main reason for who you voted for in the 2016 election. We, however, do ask about voting intentions. So you can do some proxy work around your voting intentions for a given political party and how that may shape or not your trust in given institutions.
Okay, okay. Thank you very much. Thank you for that feedback. I see another hand up. Delight, you can unmute and also ask your question. I think that's the hand up. Okay, Prof's hand is up again. Okay, so Delight, you can ask your question now. Yes.
No, please.
Please go ahead. Yeah. Your network is quite bad. Would you mind typing your question in the chat box and I'll read it out, because we can't hear you.
Good afternoon.
Delight, we can't hear you. Can you please type your question in the chat box for us?
Thank you.
Okay, so unfortunately we can't hear Delight. If you'd put his question in the chat box, I'll be very happy to read it. And there's no other hand up. Okay, I saw Enoch's hand up. Good. Okay.
Yeah, so good afternoon. My question is on the so-called interest in the military rule. Is it driven? I don't know if there was any detail to understand, if there was any attempt to understand the reasoning behind it. Is it driven by evidence of maybe past military governments performing better than democratic government? What exactly is the motive or the interest in the military government that people may be expressing their interest in having one? Is it as a result of maybe the thinking that a military government is best at tackling the weaknesses or the weaknesses of the market? So, for instance, with the recent improvement in the economic conditions, there were expectations of reduction in prices, which generally citizens felt that it has not been commensurate with the improvement in economic conditions. And these are things that people may sometimes look at and think that if it's a military government, they may have been able to address it in a better way. Are these some of the things that inform it, or are there other reasoning behind it? Thank you.
Thank you very much for your question.
Yeah, so that I can't answer because we don't ask that. And also, the actual question is not one of interest in military rule. I think the question, the specific question is, there are many ways to govern a country. Will you approve or disapprove of each of these ways? And then one of the options respondents are presented with is the military comes in to govern. And that's where you're seeing that the percentage of Ghanaians who disapprove of that alternative has gone down. As to what is fueling that disapproval, you can make some connections between other questions that are asked in the Afrobarometer survey to say that, for example, some of those declining periods did coincide with declining satisfaction with the way democracy is working. But in terms of the actual drivers, those are the things that would emerge from things like a focus group, follow-up conversations with citizens to ask them, what is driving, if they are the ones, for example, whose level of approval has gone down, that what is driving that.
Okay, thank you very much. I saw another hand up. It's probably down now, but there's a question. Okay, so the question is what Enoch has already come out to say, but there's a final question in the chat, and we only have 2 minutes to close. So I'll read that question out to you, and then we'll proceed to close today's session. So the question is, has democracy reduced corruption in Ghana, or has corruption adapted within the democratic system? Doc, is this within the data? I mean, does the data answer this?
The data doesn't answer that. We just see that. So there's a question in Afrobarometer that asks, how well are we fighting corruption? And we see that decreasing, over time. If you look at other indices like the Corruption Perception Index, you see that our scores are not necessarily improving. No significant difference over the last decade in our score on the CPI. So, yes, you can do some inference to say that perhaps it is democracy hasn't reduced it. But for me, then, it's more than just the system of government in place. It is whether you have the right institutions, the right policies, and the right approach to try and fight such a problem, whether you are in a democracy or a non-democracy. But yes, we do see that the fight against corruption is not receiving the most positive evaluation from Ghanaians in the Afrobarometer survey.
Okay. Thank you very, very, very much, Dr. John Osae-Kwapong. Dr. John Osae-Kwapong, as I said, has a lot of experience, and he's also a fellow at the Center for Democratic Governance. I'd now like to invite the Director for the Center for Social Policy Studies just to give us a minute message. I think he wants to say something, and then we can proceed to close today's session. Director, are you available?
Hello.
Yes, please. We can hear you, bro.
Can you hear me?
Yes, please.
No, nothing really much. I mean, just a word of thanks to yourself for bringing us together, our distinguished speaker for making time to take us through these helpful insights, and to all our participants who have managed to join. These are very busy times for everyone. So people have made sacrifices to join, and we very much we value these seminars a lot because they are among the means by which the center tries to, participate or contribute to policy dialogue on broader development issues that confront us as a country, but we also have implications for development at the much broader global level. So just to say thank you to everyone who has contributed to making this.
Thank you very much, Director. So once again, then, it has been a very interesting afternoon, a very, very interesting seminar presentation on our democracy. And I conclude by saying, take care, all of you. Democracy is very important. Dr. John Osae-Kwapong, we will call on you again. The CSPS bi-weekly seminar is held every Thursday. It's actually from 2 to 3 p.m. virtually. And today we had to do it at 1 p.m. because there's a conflicting college program at 2 p.m. So we had to move our seminar to 1 p.m. But we thank you once again for coming, and we look forward to having all of us again in 2 weeks for a very interesting seminar presentation. Have a good afternoon and stay well.